Pastor Sean has asked me to talk about something that is somewhat of a sensitive subject, but no less, it is very real. And basically the title of what I'm going to talk about this evening and what we deal with during this time of the year is dealing with grief and loss during the holidays. There's really not a scripture text that I could find or think of that would just sort of encompass this subject. We read about mourning and loss and grief throughout the Word, Old Testament and New. But there was a picture that came to my mind, a mental picture, and it was at Calvary. Jesus was hanging on the cross. His hands and his feet had been nail-pierced. Blood had run down his side and water. And there, standing at the foot of the cross, was Mary, the mother of Jesus. Doesn't say much about Mary and what she was doing or how she was feeling, but just because of our humanness, we can understand. If you have ever lost a child, you will definitely understand what Mary was feeling. Losing a child, I think, is one of the most horrific emotional experiences that anyone can go through. I don't think there are words to describe the feelings and the emotion and the loss that goes into that. And unless you've been there, you really don't understand at all. And there was Mary at the foot of the cross, looking up at her son, a son that she had born, a son that we are celebrating his birth in just a little over a week. And there he was, hanging on the cross, dying. I wonder what Mary was thinking, what was going through her mind. But I think what we all know is that Mary was hurting. And it was probably like a dagger had been shoved deeply into the very heart of her soul. And Jesus looked down from the cross, and he looked at his mother, and he looked at John. In essence, I believe he said to the two, "You're for each other. John, take care of my mother. Mary, let John take care of you." Grief. Why am I the one talking about this? Well, let me just give you a little bit of my background. Around 2004, I was pastoring over in Fairview, the Fairview Nazarene Church, and because of the financial situation and the work that we were doing a New Start, Restart. I was told, Mike, you need a part-time job. And they handed me a phone number, and it was to an organization called Hospice. I couldn't even spell hospice, didn't even know what it was. And I got a job. I got the job and went to work as a hospice chaplain, dealing with death and dying, being a chaplain. Also, part of my role was dealing with and overseeing the bereavement program. From there, after several months, I moved to a full-time position over in Nashville. And my primary role there was the bereavement program, along with being a chaplain as well. So in that role as bereavement coordinator and overseer, I dealt with grief. I dealt with couples and families and individuals going through this journey of grief, and worked one-on-one with individuals, led grief groups, and facilitated them. So for the last 17 or so years, I've been a hospice chaplain, dealing with death and dying basically on a daily basis. I was getting my teeth cleaned this evening, and The tech, who had never had cleaned my teeth before, she said, "What do you do?" And I said to her, I work in healthcare. Well, what do you do in healthcare? I said, well, I work in a hospice. And her response was, and maybe some of you are sitting there thinking it already, oh no. It was like, man, do I feel sorry for you. Please don't feel sorry for me in working in hospice, because I woke up one day and looked around, and don't get me wrong, I loved being a pastor. But I woke up one day and looked around and realized the ministry that I was involved with, and every day being able to share Jesus with patients and families and individuals. It's such an awesome thing. Being a pastor, you folks only want to see your pastor on Sundays and Wednesdays. Well, some people want to see him on Wednesdays, others on Sundays. And heaven forbid if he knocks on your door and doesn't call first. My goodness. And I realized that I was journeying with individuals in a very vulnerable time of their lives. And I discovered that God has allowed me, and is allowing me now, to live out my very passion. And I can look back over the hallways of my life and see how God has prepared me for this time of my life. In saying all of that, let's just talk about what grief is for a moment, and then we will talk about dealing with the grief. If you remember a few Sundays ago when I spoke about my journey of grief and loss, I gave you a definition of grief, and I'd like to share that definition again with those who are online as well. Grief is like a wound. At first it's open and bleeding, raw and terribly painful. In time that wound begins to heal. It heals from the inside out. The pain begins to fade, and eventually a scar is formed. I bet every one of us here tonight has a scar somewhere on our body. And we know exactly what we were doing, or what stupid thing we were doing when that scar or when that injury occurred. And we haven't forgotten it. Grief is like that. A wound occurs, it begins to heal, and it leaves a scar. And that scar is a reminder. Grief's like that. The problem of our grief is that we want things to go back the way they were. Grief and loss disrupts our lives. It changes our lives. Grief has physical sensations. Our heart is hurting, it's screaming, it's breaking. It physically hurts. There's a knot in our stomach that just seems like it won't go away, and there's a sinking feeling that comes when we think about that loved one. And grief also brings with it fear. The reality that death is real. But a greater reality that we too are going to die. And it brings us to the place in our lives when we realize we have no control. We have no control. We hurt. We hurt because we feel sorry for ourselves. We hurt and say, I miss you. I'm sad because you're gone. I'm sad because you're not in my life anymore. It was just all too soon. It wasn't the right time. But also we need to realize that grief is a normal reaction. It's that emotional part of us, that physical part of us that in many ways we have no control over, but those feelings come. And we all will deal with our loss, our grief in our own way. And our body is in shock. When I was dealing in the bereavement grief side of hospice primarily, I began to realize that when someone lost a loved one, I would make a phone call and send out some information to them and talk to them. But it was around month 3 that I received the phone call. And I began to assess that and investigate why month 3. And the pieces of that puzzle began to come together. By month 3, the casseroles had stopped. The phone calls had stopped. All the busyness that we have to do in closing out a life, all those tasks and responsibilities were done. And one day we look around and we say, oh, I don't have anything to do. It's all done. And then our mind begins to process. And the reality of our loss hits us. Over and over and over again, I've had people say to me, Mike, am I going crazy? I feel like I'm going crazy. I'm losing my mind. And yes, they were. But it was a normal reaction. And it's what you do with that and how you deal with that that makes all the difference. Grief has with it a year of first. Going through the first. I'll come back to that in just a moment. Healing the wound of grief is allowing ourselves to feel pain, to recognize that I am missing her. The year of first. Cindy made her transition and her journey to heaven August 1st, 2018. Christmas was right around the corner. Thanksgiving. I wanted to just stick my head in the sand and let the world pass me by and wake up on the 26th or 27th and glad that it was all over. I didn't have the joy of Christmas. One of the things that some of the experts that deal with grief and loss say to us, maybe one of the best things to do in that year of first, especially the holidays, is to change your scenery. And I did. I hopped in the car. I drove to Glen Burnie, Maryland, and spent the holidays with my daughter and her family. Was it joyful? No. Just sort of going through the motions. Trying to exert a feeling to them that, hey, Dad is okay, Grandpa is okay. But inside you were hurting, you were lonely, you were empty. Cindy loved Christmas. That was her time of the year. Her goal was to have a Christmas tree in every room. And in the last probably 4 or 5 years of her life, she accomplished that. And she had a tree in her every room, and she loved to decorate. But one of the specialties of Christmas, especially when we were pastoring, was she loved to do an open house and invite the church family in and let us enjoy a time of fellowship and fun and food. Of course, you have to have food. We're Nazarenes. And we would provide the main course, and everybody else would bring the side dishes, and we would have an evening of fun. And Cindy always made sure that each family left with something in their hand, something that normally that she had made for them. The year before she passed, the Christmas before her last, was the year that she was very, very sick and had been in the hospital and rehab and didn't get to come home till the 1st of December. And usually the pastor's open house or our celebration time was usually a couple weeks before Christmas. And so I just said to her, Cindy, I guess we won't do the open house this year. And she, if you had known her and her look, she looked at me and says, oh no, we're going to have it. And I said, well, we can't do it before Christmas. You're just not able. So we had an epiphany party. So we did it after Christmas on the day that the wise men are believed to arrive at the manger, at the stable. And we still had our Christmas party. What about now? This is Christmas 3 for me. Last year, my daughter just had a need to come home. And Crystal has had a very difficult journey losing her mom. Her and her mom were close. They talked every day at least once. And I think that I guess I'd like to know some of those conversations they had about Dad. But anyway, I went there, and they came here last year. I tried to recreate Christmas the way her mom would. I didn't do a very good job, but I did. I brought out all the decorations and put them up and made it feel as though, but there was something that was not there. It was Cindy. There was just that emptiness. This year, year 3, there's no decorations in my house. I don't plan on going to either of my children's, mainly because of I don't want to make the trip to Maryland. It's just, and with everything that's going on, don't want to do that. And my son is a nurse, and he's probably going to be working on Christmas Day, but I'll get to see him and his family afterwards. Where is my joy? I really don't have any. And please don't hold that against me. It's not that I don't believe in the birth of Christ, that in my heart I don't celebrate that and embrace that in my life. But there is that emptiness in my life that a tree or an ornament or something else can fill. And it's okay for me to feel that way. A lot of times when we have those quiet times by ourselves, we reflect on memories. And because of Cindy's love for Christmas and always making sure the kids had everything they wanted and just doted over them and lavished over them, that element of excitement. Cindy was a kid at Christmas, and that element of excitement is no longer there. Christmas, the holidays, grief and loss. How do we deal with them? What do we do? Is there any coping mechanisms? Is there things that we can do to make a difference? And I'd like to share with you some of those things that might be beneficial to you, and I hope so, and to you at home and online as well. The song, the Christmas carol, it's the most wondrous time of the year. I've heard that a few times this year, and to the point that I don't want to hear Christmas carols this year. I just don't want to hear them. Because for people who are experiencing and dealing with grief and loss during this time of the year, it isn't a wondrous time of the year. And matter of fact, many people are like me, that they're just wanting this day to get behind them and move on. I was with a family last evening. The mother was in the process of dying, actively dying. And there was only one son and his wife. She only had one child. So it was a very small family. And here it is, a week or so before Christmas. And you're losing your mom. And most of your life has just been you and Mom. I had never met the family before. And so I walked in somewhat just cold to them, not knowing them cold. But we began talking. And I have discovered over the years that one of the things that can really make a difference in that grief, that initial grief, when you know that your loved one is going to take their last breath in just a few minutes, let them begin talking about their loved one. And they began talking about, the son began talking about Mom, and the daughter-in-law began talking about her mother-in-law, and they began telling stories about Mom and things Mom had did, and we began laughing and joking, and that tension and grief just began to lift. And I'm saying to us, no matter where you're at in that journey, no matter how long ago that it has been that you have lost a loved one, talk about them. Share the funny stories. Laugh. Laughter is such a healing medicine in our lives. And I spent about 2 hours with that family last evening. And when I left, their hearts were lighter. I've discovered that my kids don't want to talk about their mom. I don't know whether it's because they might talk about her amongst themselves, but they won't talk about Cindy around me. And I think that's very unusual, but I think they're afraid, well, how is Dad going to respond? What's he going to do? What if Dad cries? And you know, guys, it's okay to cry. Dealing with and coping with grief and loss during the holidays. The first one, talk about them. Talk about your feelings. I don't feel Christmassy. And I've been thinking about that and trying to understand why. And I think I have come to an answer partially in my own life. There's no one to share that intimate joy with that we shared for 37 years. Several years ago, I attended a visitation of one of our patients, and the patient and his wife had been married 64 years. Wow. And I walked up to the casket at the funeral home and paid my condolences to the wife, who, I had been their chaplain. And I asked a very simple question, but I'll never forget the answer she gave me. I just said, "How are you doing?" She said, "Well, we've been married 64 years. we had 2 sons, and we raised those sons, and we raised them in church, and they're adults now, and they have their children, and they've left home, and it's just been my husband and I. And we had a good life. We had a very good life. We got to do many things that we wanted to do. And this is what she said that I will never forget. She said, "Half of me is gone. Half of me is gone." I know what that feels like. Some of you know what that feels like. And I think that's why I somewhat struggle with this holiday, because the half that I've shared it with and we enjoyed and made memories and is gone. And it's just me. And no one can fill the place that Cindy had in my life. And half of me is gone. Talk about your feelings. Don't hide your grief. Be tolerant of your physical and psychological limitations. A couple weeks after Cindy passed, my son was living with us. And he came in, he's a nurse, and he came in one evening and he said, "Dad, come with me." I said, "Where are we going?" He said, "We're going over to the Y," and we don't live too far from the Bellevue Y. And so I went with him, and he says, "Dad, you need to do something for you. And the best thing you can do is get you back in shape. You need to do something for you physically." And I started out working out and going to the Y regularly, and began a weight loss program. And what you see now is about 50 pounds less of what I was. But that physical exercise and doing something for me did something for me mentally. It gave me that natural high, if you will. It helped me to cope better with life. It was just amazing what that physical activity did for me. And I really didn't have a lot of expectations. It's interesting. For years I had sat on one side of the table, if you will, facilitating grief groups or doing one-on-one work with couples or individuals dealing and going through grief, because, I had read all the books, I'd gone through conferences, I had the certificates, and of course I knew all the answers. Till the day that I was sitting on the other side of the table. And I didn't have the answers. But I remembered enough to do some of the things that I had been telling other people to do. Eliminate stress in your life. Can you do that? Oh, holidays. Stress. Try to get out from under as much of that as you can. It's not just keeping busy. It's getting out from under some of those things that just weigh you down. Find things that you can do that will help other people. Do those things that can somewhat distract you from your own feelings and put a smile on other people's faith. This is a biggie for me. Be with supportive, comforting people. Our church family should be a vital part of that. Being around people who we've worshiped with, that we have got to know, we've made friendships, we've supported each other through situations. Be around them. In church family, I say this to us. We really don't know what that person is going through. They walk through the door, they have that face on that says, I'm okay. But underneath, behind that mask, is pain and hurt and loneliness. And so many times, and I've heard this over and over again, so many times people say, they should just be over it. It's been 6 months. Oh my. Get over it. No, we don't get over it. We need people in our lives who know us and who understand us, that we can be comfortable enough with to share our feelings. And I'm being a little bit vulnerable with you this evening, sharing mine, because I'm not skipping around singing Jingle Bells, and I'm not smiling when I sing Joy to the World. Matter of fact, sometimes I don't sing. We got our mask on, nobody knows. I don't get all excited when I drive up and down the highway and see all the lights, because there is this emptiness and this loneliness that I deal with almost every day. Again, let me reemphasize, allow ourselves to talk about our loved ones. I love to talk about Cindy. She was my rock. She was my strength. She was that individual that could say those things to me that no one else could say. She was even the one that could say, Mike, that sermon was a little bit off today, wasn't it? Or, maybe you shouldn't have said that from the pulpit. She was the one who at 12 o'clock on Sunday morning would do this. I'm sort of long-winded, and you might be in jeopardy because I don't have a note outline before me, so I might get on a roll and just go on. But they've been instructed to give me a sign. She could do this at 12, and if I was still going at 10 after, it was sort of like, if I was still preaching at 15 after, it was sort of like this. I'm getting my Bible and putting on my coat, and I'm leaving. We shared some wonderful memories together, and the holidays were always very special. And I love talking about her and her life. She made the difference in me. What you see here today is a lot because of who she was in my life. Do what is right for you personally. We have people around us, and some of you might have been there. People around us who tell us how we ought to feel, what we ought to do, how we ought to act. And we don't want to. Maybe we don't want to do the traditions that we've always done. Maybe we want to change things. Maybe we don't want to do anything at all. Maybe we don't want to be around people. And everybody is telling you what you should do and how you should act. Learn to do what is right for you as you go through the holidays. Learn to say no. For many of us, that's a very difficult response. But after you practice it for a while, it comes easy. No, I don't want to do that. No, I don't want to go there. No, I don't want to go to that social gathering at Christmas. And decide what you want to do that will strengthen you and help you. And if you do go to social gatherings, don't be caught off guard. And it's easy to be caught off guard. You might hear a hymn or a carol, or you might hear someone discussing how excited they are about something, and it just hits you. And you got to get out of there. Always have a plan of escape. And have someone who understands that might take your hand or guide your arm that will get you out of there. Embrace your memories. One of the hilarious memories that Cindy and I had of Christmas, we had been in Germany for 8 years, and I retired from Germany. And reason we're in Nashville area is because we retired, and I came to do my ministerial education at Trevecca. And the kids, basically, all they knew was Germany. Crystal was 2 when we arrived there. Michael was born there. So all of their Christmases, basically, that they remembered was Germany. And we got back in July, and from July till December, oh man, they were having a very difficult time adjusting to the States. They were overwhelmed. They'd never been in a Toys R Us. They'd never had a TV that had a remote control or more than one station. You know, they were just overwhelmed. And man, we had to do a day for each one of them to have the remote because they would fight. And getting closer to Christmas, we would say, you guys, you better shape up because Santa's not going to come. You know, we were trying to put the fear of Santa in them, and they just didn't listen. We lived in a split-level house, and the main living room was on the main floor, and the family room was down in the lower level. And we'd put up the Christmas tree on the main floor. That's where we primarily lived, and the fireplace was there and all of that. So we decided that we would put Santa Claus would come and put his gifts down in the family room. Christmas morning came. Kids were all excited. They ran out into the living room and looked around, and there wasn't a thing there. And Michael, who is the youngest, looked at his sister, and I'll never forget what he said. I didn't think we'd been that bad. Cindy couldn't take it any longer. That was all she could do. And she says, oh, maybe he came somewhere else. And we made our way down to the family room downstairs. You think I'm cruel, don't you? But that was always one of those memories we probably shared every Christmas and laughed with the kids about it, and I'm sure that they will never forget it. Embrace your memories. Embrace those times together during the holidays. Think about the positive things in your life. Wow. A couple years ago, one of my patients' family members gave me a little slip of paper, and there was a little statement on it. And the statement said this: what if you woke up today with all the things you thanked God for yesterday? And I thought, man, there are some days that I would wake up with nothing. Think about the positive things in our lives. Wow. We are so blessed. God is such a gracious and giving God. He is a comforting God. In thinking about the positive things in our lives, learn to be kind to yourself. it is so easy to beat ourselves up mentally and emotionally, thinking about what we could have done, what we should have done, or how we could have done something differently that might make a difference. Be kind to ourselves. Do something that makes you feel better. Allow ourselves to be around loving and caring people. Be around those people who are sensitive to you. I always find it comforting to be around people who have known Cindy and shared some of our life experiences together, and being able to talk about her and know that they identify and understand what I'm talking about. Set boundaries. Set boundaries during the holidays. Know what you can handle and what you can't. But most of all, be reminded that there is a God who loves you. And that even in the midst of your hurt and pain and loss and emptiness, He is there. And He takes our hand and He walks with us. He understands. He knows. So hopefully something that I have said this evening and shared with you might encourage you as you're going through, and if you're going through loss and grief during the holidays, whether it has been this past year or whether it has been many years. I ask myself, does it get easier? I think the getting easier is possibly just learning to live with it. Trying to find something that might be a good distractor away from the missing of our loved one. Now, let's. Does anyone have any questions? Let's do some question and answers and see what we can. Does anyone have any questions? Anyone have any comments? Anyone who wants to share? No. No, it doesn't. Anyone else? Comment? Question? Let me just say this, and I didn't talk about it, touch on it, but it is a very vital area. We, the adult, experience grief and loss, but there are those in our family mix, our grandchildren, the small children. They might not know how to verbalize what they're feeling. Some of it might come out through negative actions. Back years ago when we were doing the grief groups and the Christmas grief groups, we always did a children's grief group and brought them in. And Dr. Anita D'Amico, who is a licensed psychologist, partnered with me and worked with the children and did activities that tried to allow them the opportunity to express and show what they were feeling. Because our children hurt and grieve as well. My daughter told me a few months after Cindy had made her journey to heaven that our grandson Caden was sitting in his room crying. He was just sitting on the floor crying. And she said to him, Caden, what's the matter? And he says, I miss Mama. I miss Mama. So let's remember and be sensitive to the children as well, because they're feeling that loss and hurt also, and many times do not know how to express those feelings or maybe even know what they are. So, anyone else? Well, thank you for your attention this evening. Thank you for those online who have participated and listened. Again, I hope that maybe something that I said might be of encouragement and help to us all. Heavenly Father, thank you for our time together. And God, you have a way of speaking into our hearts and our lives with just the right thing. So God, take this time together and minister to us, encourage us, and help us. Remind us always that you never leave us nor forsake us, that you're always with us. In Jesus' name we pray.